The last session, we focused on the contract offer and acceptance. And the third part of this is consideration, and that's what we're going to look at in this lesson. The three basic blocks that you need for a contract. Consideration is the requirement of the agreement. The offer and the acceptance is the agreement, but we have to give up something in order to form the contract. Example, I'll do X if you do Y. And we agree to that, then I agree to do X, you agree to do Y. I'm doing X to my detriment, you're doing Y to yours. Let's say that I agree to paint your house for $400. Well, my time spent painting the house is to my detriment. You paying $400 is to your detriment. Even though both of us may get value from that, it's the giving up of time or whatever that we are doing to our detriment. Contract law does not consider if you get a fair deal. That's not part of the contract requirements. For example, if I agree to paint your house and it takes me 2 weeks and I only make $400, that doesn't sound like a very good deal. I can't complain because that's what I bargained for in the contract agreement. The conditions, contract conditions, may be governed by fairness. For example, I agree to paint your house for $400, but we put a clause in the contract that if I fail to perform in the next 2 weeks, that I will have to pay $1,000 in liquidated damages. Well, $1,000 in damages for something that was only going to cost $400 is probably not fair. And in this case, we could raise an issue of fairness in the contract conditions. Consideration can also be the not doing of an act. Let's say that I purchased the lot next to your house and I plan on building a house, and in building that house I'm going to block your view of the lake. Well, you come over to me and say, listen, if you'll move your house 100 feet back, I'll pay you $5,000. Well, your detriment is paying me $5,000. My detriment, my consideration is I'm not going to build my house where you asked me, where I'd planned to build it. So the not doing of an act can be consideration. Something that's not consideration is a promise to perform an already existing duty. The idea being is if I already have a duty to perform that function, then there's no detriment or there's no consideration on my part. It's also not consideration for the performing of an act already performed. So something that I've already completed, I did not perform that act in reliance on an agreement between you and me on a contract. So the act already performed is not consideration. Consideration is not always required. It's not required in charitable contributions. So if I call into a telethon and offer them money, we have a contract, normally known as a pledge. Certain provisions of the Uniform Commercial Code do not require consideration. We're going to talk more about the Uniform Commercial Code in later lessons, more specifically dealing with sales and a little bit on secured transactions. And the third one is promissory estoppel, sometimes called doctrine of detrimental reliance. And what this is basically if I perform an act intending or that you will rely upon that promise or whatever, then you can't unfairly benefit from that. An example would be, let's say that my next door neighbor is going out of town. He says, hey, I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks. I just want you to look after my house. Well, everything's going along fine. And I noticed one day that his yard needs cutting, and the neighborhood association says, hey, he needs to have his yard cut. So I go over there and cut it for him. When he gets home, I say, hey, you owe me $50 for cutting your grass. He said, wait a minute, we didn't have a contract. We didn't agree to this. Well, no, but you asked me to look after it, and this was something that needed to be done. I did it to my detriment, to your benefit, and that would be a doctrine of detrimental reliance in that situation. A contract must also be for a lawful purpose, but while it is lawful to do some things, the contract could be unenforceable because of public policy, or something that would harm the public. In a previous lesson, we talked about turtle excluder devices for fishing nets. While it would be lawful for me to make those and sell those because society wants to discourage any nets being made without a turtle excluder device, the fact that I make nets that do not have the turtle excluder device could be against public policy, and therefore the contract may be unenforceable. Non-competition clauses show up many times in contracts, especially in a business context where usually it's between an employee and what we're doing is the employee signs an agreement that if they leave the company, they're not going to compete against us. Normally, a non-competition clause requires three things. It's going to have a geographical area, there will be a time limit, and normally there is specific language as to what is not allowed. If I'm a salesman and I leave your company to go to another company, then sales is my profession. It would be unreasonable to say you cannot sell within this region. Normally what we would have is I'm a widget salesman, and the non-competition clause says that you cannot sell widgets within a 100-mile radius for 2 years. So we have the geographical area, 100-mile radius, we have the time limit, 2-year period of time, and what's not allowed, selling widgets. that means I could sell gadgets. The only exception there may be if gadgets compete with widgets, that might be a problem. That you could say, well, you're not selling widgets, but you're selling gadgets, and that's in competition with us. Therefore, that violates the clause. It also tells me that I can go outside that geographical area and sell widgets. While oral contracts are legally enforceable, there are some contracts that must be in writing. And this concept is known as the statute of frauds. To prevent fraud, the sale of land, the sale of goods under the Uniform Commercial Code, it's now goods over $5,000, and contracts that take more than 1 year to perform are required to be in writing. So when we have a contract that's in writing, whether it's required to or not, every concept, every condition, every consideration must be in the document. We cannot use oral evidence to support something that's in the contract. We look to the body of the contract. And the idea behind this is that, again, we mentioned this earlier about negotiations. Is you're making an offer and a counter offer, and then there's a counter to that. There's negotiations going on back and forth. Then you finally come down to the terms. And so the contract, within the four corners of the contract, you have exactly what you have agreed upon. If we were to allow oral evidence to come in regarding that, then the written document is of no effect, because you can always come in and say, well, that's not what we agreed upon orally. So the rule is that once it's written, what's in there is what's in there. There is a provision that allows oral evidence to be introduced for ambiguous terms. Of course, it's recommended that you are clear on your writings, that you are as explicit and specific as you can be, so that there is no ambiguity. With that, and as we're talking about the four corners of the document, that the rules of construction, first of all, the contract, the parties agree to be bound. Words are interpreted to their ordinary usage. And as I've said, the contract is read and construed as a whole. Some contract provisions will state that if part of the contract is declared null and void, it doesn't void the whole contract, that document, that part is pulled out, and the rest of the contract stands. While a contract is to be read and construed as a whole, you can have a contract. The contract can refer to other documents. for example, we may have a contract to board horses, and the contract would say this contract is to board 3 horses. Those horses are named in a document, and of course we would attach that document as part of the contract at that point in time.